It is Wednesday, February 21st, 2024, and it is 1:31 p.m. Members, I have received a message from Trustee Ahuna, Trustees Ahuna and Galuteria to be excused from this meeting. And they're duly excused, but present is the committee vice chair, Trustee Alapa, Trustee Aquina, Trustee Souza, Chair Hulu Lindsay, and myself. And Trustee Trask is also here virtually, giving us the quorum to conduct.
Trustee Waihe'e.
And Trustee Akaka, I see you.
Thank you.
Trustee Akaka is also here. So we have the quorum to conduct the meeting. Members joining us, as supporting us on the video conference, and technically is Crane Aquina and Melissa Winahan. Also joining us on behalf of admin is our Ponui Casey. And I will now turn it over to Casey to introduce the remaining staff on the video conference. Casey.
Mahalo, Chair Waihe'e. Aloha mai, good afternoon, trustees. Here supporting this meeting today from administration is Interim General Counsel Everett Ota, CFO Ramona Hink. We have Endowment Director Ryan Lee, our Interim Senior Legal Counsel Nichi Ozawa, Financial Analyst Grace Chen is on, and our ever-long support from our IT folks. We have IT Manager Tiger Lee on site, and virtually we have Systems Engineer and Administrator Kevin Cha. Mahalo, Chair Waihe'e.
Well, thank you, Casey. So members, moving on, the approval of minutes. My understanding is there is no testimony on the approval of the minutes.
Yeah, 0 registrants for any agenda listing today.
Okay. With that, can I get the motion to approve the committee minutes of January 31st, 2024?
So moved, Chair.
It's been moved by Trustee Hulu Lindsay, seconded by Trustee Souza. Are there any changes to those minutes? If there are none, can I get a roll call vote for their approval?
Trustee Ahuna is excused. Trustee Akaka.
Aye.
Trustee Aquina.
Aye.
Trustee Alapa.
Aye.
Trustee Galuteria is excused. Trustee Lindsay. Trustee Souza. Trustee Trask.
Aye.
Chair Waihe'e.
Yes.
7 yes votes.
Okay, the minutes are approved. We have no unfinished business, so moving on to new business, consequent capital management. I will turn this portion of the meeting directly over to Vijay Chatterjee to run it as he sees fit. Vijay, go ahead.
Aloha, trustees, staff, other members and stakeholders that are present. It's nice to be back in front of all of you again at the RMC meeting. Again, my name is Vijay Chatterjee. I'm with Consequent Capital Management. And I believe on we don't have outside speakers today, but on the speaker feed here, I believe Jerry Flintoff is present, and he's focused in on private markets, so he's listening. And then we may have a number of other people listening in through the public live stream. So once again, thank you for having us here. As people know, we are the board consultant on the investment program. And for today's material, we don't have outside speakers, but we're going to go through as we do the format that we've sort of established in order to communicate consistently and hopefully comprehensively with the board. So you have some presentation slide deck, which I think we'll have up on the screen for people to be able to refer to. If some of the document is a little bit of the background, and there's an investment glossary in the back for your reference as usual. But I will take you straight to page 4, if that's all right. So page 4, like we always do, we like to do a little bit of a review in terms of what we covered in the previous session, some of the education pieces or speakers that we may have had. And then the second part of that, We highlight some of the activities that we expect coming up over the next several months. And then we'll proceed into today's activities. So in terms of the last session, you'll recall that we introduced several investment concepts. I'm sure many of you have seen these terms and these ideas before: compound returns, volatility, up capture, down capture, distribution of returns, and tail risk. These ideas that we went into some detail last time are used throughout kind of investments and finance, but we tried to put it in the context of how it's relevant to you as fiduciary trustees. And I'm happy to talk about these again, particularly if we have one-on-one meetings or whenever you have questions. And that goes for the staff and aides as well. Happy to continue that. I would just mention that in terms of like the compounding returns, which we all learn in 5th grade and we see at our bank accounts when we buy a CD or put our money into savings, we accept some kind of interest, and that interest makes interest on the interest. And so that's the compounding effect that I mentioned, like Benjamin Franklin and others thought was so nifty and important in terms of human development even. What I would point out to you as trustees managing a portfolio into perpetuity is that the compounding effect is tremendous, as we discussed. And so as long-term investors, that's kind of like your superpower. Not every investor, individuals can take advantage of being long-term investors and being able to sit through markets that go up and down for different reasons and continue to grow, using compounding returns over time. Volatility is one of those things that can be very detrimental to a portfolio for a long-term investor. So on the whole, there are many definitions and ways that volatility is used in the marketplace. It usually implies something like a frequent changing of prices. It is a measure of uncertainty in the market when you have a lot of volatility. But there are traders and there are strategies that can trade volatility, and you can actually generate positive returns using volatility. So while I'll say you as long-term fiduciary investors tend to not like volatility, you want nice and steady returns over the long term that you know are growing your portfolio. Volatility is something that you tend to shy away from. But that's just a generality. There are times in a portfolio of different types of assets where strategies that take advantage of higher volatility could be very effective. And we'll talk more about that in time, I think, if we look at adding different types of strategies in the portfolio. But just as a rule of thumb, you as trustees tend to not like volatility because you're long-term investors. Traders, short-term investors, they tend to like the uncertainty in the market because they believe they can trade around that and make money at others' expense. So that's kind of volatility. The up capture, down capture was a percentage and even a ratio that we talked about. And when you look at your manager's performance, that's one of the metrics you can ask for. And it sort of says, how do they do when the markets are going up? Are they capturing 100% or more than 100% of the market? When markets are going down, let's measure and see, do they go down 100% with the market, or do they go down less than the market? Or worse, maybe they go down more than the market. So it's a tool, it's a way to look at sort of how managers do in different types of markets. And of course, as long-term investors, while you want to generate as much as you can on the upside, it's really the downside where the payoff comes, where if you can lose less than others, or even not lose when the market is losing, over the long term, you're going to start compounding at that better position, and your portfolio will tend to grow better. And that's what your advantage as a long-term investor. Distribution of returns had to do with, as you watch a strategy over time, or theoretically what you expect a strategy to do, it should have times when it produces positive returns and negative returns. And the distribution of returns are generally presented as a chart or a graph that shows those possibilities over time. Many of us are familiar with the so-called Bell chart, which is what they call a normal distribution. As investors, if possible, all investors, you want asymmetric returns, but what you want is that that distribution is not normal, but if you can get a few more upside returns over time, again, that'll lead to positive compounding and growth of your portfolio over time. So we talk about trying to generate asymmetric returns. And when you talk about your hedge funds and your alternative investments, that's kind of what they're pushing. They're saying, we're not just going to give you the expected return. Our investments are skewed to the upside, and we're going to produce more positive outcomes than normal or negative outcomes. If you have something that's skewed on the downside, that's something to be wary of, because that's saying that even if it doesn't happen a lot, there may be surprises. And that takes us to the tail risk, which are kind of extreme returns. So that distribution of returns, you'll see at the very extremes of those outcomes, there's a little blip in the chart. And that little blip doesn't look like much, but it could have a tremendous effect on your overall performance. We want it on the right side of the distribution curve because that implies positive returns. But when you have it on the negative side and you're not really managing that downside risk, then that can be devastating to your long-term performance and outcomes. These are just a few of the tools, and we'll develop more over time that you as trustees can use to oversee the portfolio. And these are the kinds of questions and issues that you want to bring up when you see the performance of your portfolio, or a manager comes and tells you, hey, I've got this great strategy. Well, what does the strategy look like? What's the up capture? What's the down capture? Do you have a distribution of returns that we can look at, either based on historical or some proactive view of the future? So these are the conversations that you as trustees have, that staff can have, that your consultants should be having. So that was the introduction of several concepts last time. We also had a CIO panel, if you recall. We had CIOs from the Nevada Public Pension Plan, from LACER's, the Los Angeles City Pension Plan, and the former CIO of the Hawaii EUTF group that also presented. And they gave their perspective of how they manage institutional portfolios, how they work with their board, how they work with their staff. And they had different types of investments. You recall the Nevada PERS had a lot of very passive market exposure type investments. LACER's was active in a lot of the alternative space, and they worked with their boards in different capacities. I think with the EUTF, they worked a lot with consultants, and they reported into their board. And I think they still have their board approve a lot of the investments that go on there, as opposed to maybe LACER's, which has a very experienced team, and their CIO has been there a long time, and they are given more leeway to have discretion at some levels of making investments and then reporting back to the board what they've done over time. But all of that is very dependent on those institutions. And so as you, as the trustees of the OHA portfolio, come to figure out exactly, how you want to manage the portfolio going forward, because you're managing it now and you have managed it historically, but what is going to be relevant going forward? And that's some of the things we will talk about. And you may want to do it exactly the same way you do it now. You may want to change things. There are lots of options, but you collectively as a board need to decide how it is you want to manage. And so those CIOs that came in front of you gave you different examples of how they come to their solution. It's not going to necessarily be what OHA does, but we can always learn from watching what others are doing in the marketplace. And hopefully maybe you generate conversations or a network of your peers. Like, remember a couple times ago, we had a trustee from the EUTF come and speak, Christian Fern. Those sorts of people in the marketplace, they have a good understanding of what you're going through. And so they make a good sounding board or network. How did you guys handle, working with new investment opportunities? How do you bring yourself up to speed, and where do you make decisions? These are all important things in terms of how to manage the overall portfolio. So that's kind of the education review. If I can turn now and just talk a little bit about where we are in terms of the calendar of events or activities coming up. So you see, we today is something that I'm calling observations. So I'll speak a little bit more about that, but we've kind of been looking at the portfolio. We've been talking to different trustees and staff and kind of getting an idea of where things are. And the rest of this presentation is full of some of our observations. On March 6th, I have us coming back and I'm calling it recommendations. That's where we'd actually like to come in with some red line versions or specific memos saying, this is what we think you could or should be doing, or here are some options of how you might think about revising portfolio policy or procedures of how you oversee the portfolios and what are the appropriate roles and responsibilities that you and trustees have, maybe what staff has and so on. That may also get pushed a little bit into the March 20th because there's sort of the high level policies and then there's things that get a little close to operations or specific in asset classes. And as we're going through some of the asset classes, there may be a lot more detail that we want to opine on. And so, but we'll try and do most of this in March. And then really at your timetable, Chair and trustees, in terms of how you want to adopt that or the conversations you want to have around that. Kind of can happen. And I think the idea of having a fairly fully formed policy procedure way to oversee the portfolio going forward, maybe target to have that all in place by the end of the fiscal year. So you almost, you just kind of start off with a fresh foot going forward. But again, that's all up to you as a body to decide that. And so we make recommendations and give advice, but ultimately it's your call. The other meetings there, you see there are a number of your managers as well as your performance report and custodian who will come and speak in front of the trustees. There may also be some prospects that we might want to get in there because they have particular expertise in certain strategies that might be helpful for the portfolio. I'll note on the version that you're seeing here on the screen, I've already made a change to the May 22nd where you'll have Goldman Sachs come in and JP Morgan come in. So those are very important managers in your portfolio. They have certain levels of discretion and you see their portfolio. So very important for you guys to have a direct understanding and dialogue with these managers and what they do for you. And that's the sort of the conversations that we'd like to have with them as they come in. And again, it's not that you need to oversee or micromanage what they do. Once you've given them a mandate, it's more like making sure that they're doing what they said they're doing, that they're performing the results that you expect to have from them. But the other, so the reasons why it's important to bring your investment managers in front of you and actually take some of your precious time. I mean, there are many reasons, but I tend to kind of think in three sometimes. And so, I think there's an accountability that they have. They're investing your money. We had the other week, the private market, not Paragon, Pantheon come and speak to you, right? And even though you haven't made a new investment in Pantheon for several years now, they're still making investments based on your previous contracts. And it's important that, if they're investing money for you, that they are accountable for that, and they should come and explain what they're doing and why it makes sense for OHA going forward. Another reason, a second reason, is that it's important for them to know you, to know OHA. They have a lot of clients. That Pantheon came and they have global clients. They have billions and billions of dollars that they invest. And someone at Pantheon should know, why is OHA different? What is it that you're trying to achieve? What are your visions and goals for this portfolio? And they need to have a direct conversation, and no one better than the trustees to articulate that. Finally, also, there is, by participating in the market, by being in front of market participants and investors, OHA has an opportunity to brand themselves, to make sure that you're remembered in the marketplace. And as opportunities and ideas come to these market investors who are out there always looking for opportunities, they remember, oh yeah, I know OHA is interested in this sort of a strategy. There may be 5 or 6 of their clients that might be interested in that. But if they know OHA, maybe you're on that list as opposed to now. So I do think those are reasons why we want to bring the managers in front of you. And it's not that they would necessarily come in every RMC meeting. It seems like a lot right now, but that's because of the pandemic and because of, certain issues. I think they haven't been in front of you recently. And there needs to be more of that sort of reporting. So they'll probably, it's typical of asset owners like yourself to bring these kinds of managers in front of them maybe once every 2 years, unless there's some specific issue that you want to hear from them, then absolutely they should come and present because you have a reason for them to come. So that's kind of the preview of where we're going. And, before I get into our observation session, are there any questions or comments on anything that I've said up to this point? I want to be respectful of your time, but I also want to be responsive. None so far. Okay, great. So we do those reviews every time we come in front of you. So, all right. So if you can move on to page 5, where we have a lot, and the next several pages are fairly dense with text and with ideas. And I hope to go through fairly quickly, but it may take a little time. Feel free to stop me if you want to at any point. Also, I'm looking forward to having follow-up conversations with everyone. The idea of observations before we get to recommendations and before we get to actionable policy changes is that collectively within OHA, you need to be having conversations about the best way to manage your portfolio. And so one thing, an idea that I come across in my work is that, if you look around the room, everyone that's here is a very successful, well-functioning person. I mean, if you compare yourselves to just the humanity, you've done something right to be here. And to be successful, a lot of times it's because you're able to provide solutions. Someone has a problem, here's a solution, you give it to someone, and then we can move on. And a lot of successful people, that's how they sort of articulate and explain why they're successful. They're able to solve problems. They're able to give solutions. And part of where I am right now in terms of observations is I don't want to go right to the solution, right to the recommendations. We need to spend time in something what I'm going to call problem space. So problem space is not, here's what you should do. It's more trying to define what is it we're trying to solve here. Generally speaking, we're trying to build an institutional quality investment portfolio, but that's not a generic portfolio. That's the OHA portfolio. So what does it mean to be investing for OHA's goals, missions, future? And how does that then get expressed? So we're going to come to solutions. We're going to be in solution space. And that's sort of why we're all good at that, but we need to spend time in problem space. And so there's a story that's attributed to Einstein, and I think it's not accurate, but people say this is what Einstein said. He never said it, but he could have said, if he had to solve, if the world were coming to an end and he had to come up with a way to save the world, he would spend 55 minutes thinking about what's the problem and then 5 minutes solving the problem. And so that's kind of the division of labor. I mean, now that's a nice story. And, he was a theoretical physicist. So maybe, when you can think of ideas and then, the eclipse happens several years later and you get a lot of credit for that, that's fine. That's not actually where you are, right? You have to solve the problems and deal with the investments today. You have an existing portfolio that you manage one way. You want to know how should you manage it in the future. So we can't stay in problem space forever. And we can't spend 50 minutes or 55 minutes of the hour figuring out why we should save the earth and that just 5 minutes saving it. We actually have to kind of do it at the same time. But if you humor me, today I'm saying let's stay in problem space and let's talk about these observations that then we can continue to have conversations between now and whenever Consequent comes back to you with actionable and concrete recommendations. So that's kind of where we are. So this first page here on page 5, these are just sort of general observations. And what we're going to see is on the left side of the page going forward is we sort of have the takeaways that we feel, maybe are to emphasize. And on the right side, We just have a list of bullet points of different observations. And I'm going to try and run through this fairly quickly, but again, feel free to stop me. And, but again, I'm hopefully not giving you any solutions or tipping that into that direction. It's hard not to do, you know, when you're someone who, "Oh, I want to give solutions to everybody," it's hard not to get into that, but let's stay in problem space for now and just make observations and figure out, does that make sense? And is that really the problem? So, generally speaking, you know, we're trying to build an investment program of best practices. There needs to be responsibility and accountability and transparency that goes throughout the program, you know, wherever we are in it. The current program has, you know, the appropriate governing documents. They're in there. They cover a lot of ground. But it's been apparent to us at Consequent that a lot of this has sort of been inherited, right? And you know, the regime, if you will, that was in charge or oversight and had responsibility, many of those people, I think, or maybe all of those people, are no longer here. So it is relevant to come back, I think, and kind of say, okay, is what is in place appropriate? Maybe it was appropriate before, but what is going to work going forward? And so that's something that we note. There are also at the bottom of the half of the page, the idea of, you know, you have to execute. You have the supervision, you have the oversight, and then you also have to implement, right? You have to implement the portfolio. And so where and how is that being decided at the moment? And what would be a best practice for us to do that going forward? So we need rationale for decision-making, and we need appropriate reporting channels. So as trustees, no one expects you to be watching the markets or the portfolios every day. There's a lot on your plate, clearly. But where is that happening? And then when is it appropriate, and what is appropriate to be reported back to the trustees? That I think needs to be done in a more systematic manner than it is at the moment. Maybe it was done that before, changed for whatever reason. And there were, yeah, clearly a lot of issues like the pandemic that have interfered with sort of basic activities. And, you know, we're all dealing with that, but now let's see what do we think will work for the future. So on the right side, you know, we look at, you know, this manager of managers approach. That's what you have now. And again, it was sort of created under a different time. You have an investment policy statement with a lot of clear and distinct policy. Yes.
Going back
Trustee.
to the first one,
Yes.
manager of manager, do you believe a change is in order?
So I think that what I'll say is that my personal observation is maybe it's not the ideal structure in terms of where you are, but that's getting a little bit to solution. And if I bring solutions to you, I'd like to give you options and different ideas as opposed to just outright saying it's not appropriate. There may be other folks who aren't speaking or asking right now who might think the manager approach is appropriate. And that's a conversation worth having, right? Because it was put in place for some reason, and it maybe was very effective at one point. But again, it's worth exploring again. And I would say you do want to explore that. You want to explore where decisions are made and discretion, because there is an incongruence about that at the moment. And the rationale, the transparency, I don't think is getting back up to the trustees where you're comfortable or understand how decisions are necessarily being made and what's appropriate. So that's a conversation I'll go into maybe more later. But
Yeah, I truly appreciate that, because it gives us an idea of where we stand and the lack of information. So it leaves us hanging at times, in fact, most of the time. So if we have someone like you, in your opinion, or professional opinion, on having a money manager or not, or more current to today's times of what you're already observing and being successful at, I would appreciate to have that information from you.
And I'm happy to have those conversations. And what I would encourage all the trustees to do, and staff and others who are interested in the portfolio, if you have that sort of observation or that concern, jot it down and let's have a conversation about it so we can put it appropriately where it needs to be in the ongoing conversation. Because again, a lot of these observations that we're making, we would like to make them into actionable recommendations, right? Where you can vote and say, yes, we'd like to rewrite this policy statement, or we'd like to create this process. But again, that's sort of a little bit down the road, not quite yet. Going down, maybe the third to the last bullet point there, I would just highlight, you do want to have kind of a comprehensive, holistic approach. And maybe one thing with the manager approach, it's a little more siloed. And again, if this were a family office or something, I've seen very successful family offices that have very siloed approaches to their investment opportunities. They make a lot of money, but you're a different kind of entity. And so we have to ask, is that appropriate, the way decisions are made? A silo, kind of like a lot of decisions made within a manager or an asset class versus someone who's holistically looking at the overall portfolio and thinking about risk and opportunities and how they impact each other. So that's along the lines of, remember, we talked about building an aquarium. Maybe you don't remember, but I did make a comment kind of like, if you're trying to invest in opportunities around the world, it's like the ocean. You can never have the ocean, but you've got to build an aquarium. So it's appropriate to ask, what are the opportunities and how do you build something that creates the portfolio that's appropriate to you, the portfolio being the aquarium. But we don't have to spend too much time on that analogy. I'll move on to page 6, but
But I just
question.
asked you the question regarding, I think you
Yeah.
skipped it. The decisions related to investments appear to follow established procedures, but accountability for the decisions in terms of rationale and reporting are not always clearly recorded. You're
Yeah.
saying that that is what you've observed and we're
So-
currently
so
experiencing that
So
now?
in terms of recording, it's like reporting, right? So and again, decision-making is made, you have managers that are making investment decisions. And so where are the documents and procedures in terms of how they do things? Now, they assumed at one point, maybe when they were hired, they went through, this is our investment process. But a lot of times, you need to follow up and you need to continue to understand how are they making decisions and
Exactly.
why. And so those conversations need to happen, and you need to be set. Even if you've hired someone, you continuing to use them. That's why I said, like in the beginning, when we have these managers come, maybe they come every, 18 months or something to just re-inform you about how they're doing things and how the portfolio is performing. As well as you also get investment reports that, need to be explained and presented to the
But
board.
is 18 months the average? I mean, it sounds quite a while before
So
you hear
it-
from
it-
your
it-
manager.
It depends, again, how you structure it, but a lot of institutional investors, because they're long-term investors, it might be 2 years before they hear from a particular manager. Because a lot of times institutional investors, when they do decide to invest with a particular manager, whether it's the public side or the private side, you need time to see how they're doing. And so they don't want to be changing managers every year or every
Got it.
6 months. They're like, if you're in the portfolio, you need to be in the portfolio at least 5 years for us to have any idea of whether you're doing well or not. And then beyond that. So again, we can come back and talk about these sorts of things going forward.
Oh, Trustee Trask, did you have a question?
Comment. I'm so very thankful to see this, VJoy. But when I look at the materials commencing at page 5, the way I'm reading it is first overview, advisory to us, you're flagging us areas that we need to focus on and now supplement is how I'm looking at it. But in terms of page number 5, everything that follows will give me the detail of these kind of corrective measures is what I'm looking at now. The other thing I wanted to ask, though, is that as we go forward, the advisories that I get from you, VJoy, from you, and your folks that are advising us now, I would like to put a little more flesh on the detail when we go through it. Page number 5 is an overview of some of the things that we need to look at. But one of the things, for instance, that Trustee Alapa just raised is, decisions are being made, but there's supposed to be an established procedure, but it's not being recorded. You don't record it, you don't have it. The decisions are supposed to come from the board and not from the staff. The board is the one that is carrying the liability up. So the training that we need to get from yourself and others this coming year is going to help us to correct that problem. On page number 4, you gave me month by month overview for our investment, training and the oversight, yeah? And you put in Goldman Sachs, I guess it's coming in May or June. But I need to have something for the pages that follow page 5, because we're gonna need to follow up on this with you,
Is there Goldman Sachs you mentioned?
you know, with you. So I just want to make sure that we include that. And the last point is that when trustees come into OHA, we have a couple of weeks of what's called onboarding orientation. Nothing on portfolio management, nothing. So when you take a look at future services, training and education we need, think about that for what we could put in to do a better job for onboarding for our trustees. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Trustee Trask. Those were terrific comments. And in fact, you know, one point I want to clarify is that some of the subsequent pages and the details, they're not meant to be necessarily answering anything that was on page 5. It's still kind of, we're trying to observe, you know, the things that we've seen in different aspects of the portfolio. So page 5 is just kind of an overview. And then when we talk about, you know, how frequently should a manager present in front of the board, that's a little bit getting into solution space. And there's more than one solution, right? Maybe 18 months or 2 years is too long for OHA to hear from a manager. Maybe it's too soon. It just depends on the frequency and that you have a defined process. And so there are different ways you're going to be able to define that. But I just put that as an example at the risk of getting into the solution space when I really want to stay in kind of the problem space. So the problem is essentially you're not hearing enough from what's going on in the portfolio at different levels, different ways, maybe from the manager, maybe from your performance reports. And so how do we go about solving that? That's what we want to come back with in terms of recommendations, but we'd also like to have that conversation. That's the purpose of having the observations and then the recommendations, and then eventually you take action, right? So let's start to have those conversations. They don't all have to happen right now, here and now, but they need to happen, right? Because ultimately you should all be comfortable and be willing to get behind whatever the policies and procedures are and understand how the portfolio is being managed. So hopefully that was helpful. And thank you again, Trustee Trask, for.
I just have one other point. You know, Vijay, I'm extremely concerned with point second column, third to the last. Comprehensive and holistic management of the investment program is not possible in the current structure. That is like a hammer falling down on a trustee's fiduciary obligation. So, you know, I'd like to, that's why trustees, we need to take a look at that. But, you know, is it going to take me a year, Vijay, to get this thing in a better structure? That's a long time. What's the quickest we can do with your folks' assistance to get this thing into a more holistic and comprehensive management format?
Yeah, so thank you, Trustee Trask. That'll be driven by you as trustees in terms of kind of how quickly you want to adopt any recommendations that we bring in front of you. And we're trying to get to the recommendations portion, you know, maybe in March. You know, there's a couple of meetings that you have in March, so we should have various recommendations. But the observation is just that the structure that you have tends to force decisions and oversight into what we call kind of a silo approach. And again, I'm not saying that under certain circumstances with certain types of investors, that isn't necessarily a bad thing, but is that appropriate for OHA? And what I'm hearing you say is that that's not the way that you would like it to be overseen and managed. And I think that's fair. And so now let's have that conversation, and then let's have consequent come back with the recommendations that reflect a consensus, so that there's an ability to adopt it and to get behind it. So thank you. And if I can move on to page 6. So these are kind of governance observations and and again, kind of things to take away. So we want to have follow-up discussions. I do think that, currently your resource management committee is where you essentially have your, what other organizations might call the investment committee. And it does seem appropriate because I know that there's like the direct investments and there's other activities. And so and I think it is an appropriate place where you can coordinate conversations and reporting, and then move it up to the other committees or the board when you need sort of input or decision-making or ratification of activities that you decide here. Now, even if the board is making kind of final decisions and getting information funneled through the RMC, there may be, and I do understand, all the trustees are on the RMC, are also on the board. In terms of being able to get work, there are other ways to go about and get work done. You may consider, like, does it make sense for maybe the chair and the vice chair to get a little more information or involved with the portfolio between meetings or on an ongoing basis? Or are there other trustees that you would want to have delegate those responsibilities to? And then how do you prevent it so that it doesn't end up just being with a couple of trustees when it really needs to be kind of a shared responsibility? So do you rotate responsibilities over some explain? Those are solutions, but I just highlight them in the sense of, like, that's the direction you can go. The observation is that the RMC is an appropriate place to have these presentations and the meetings and issues brought up. And then the question is, is it the way it functions? Is it sort of optimal for everyone to get the most out of the experience of overseeing this institutional portfolio? And there's no one right answer, and I'm not getting to answers now, but I want to put that out there because that needs to be the conversation that you have amongst yourselves, that you have with me, that you have with staff, so that we can come back and make a recommendation that you believe in, that you think you can execute. So then going to the sort of the observations on the right side, I think I've highlighted some of that already in terms of the takeaways. But, like, for example, the portfolio performance, there should be a regular schedule of reporting that. It doesn't have to be every meeting. It doesn't have to be every day in terms of portfolio. You're a long-term investor, but maybe quarterly at the very least. Some investment asset classes maybe don't need quarterly reporting. Maybe they need annual reporting. It really depends on the investor and the level of oversight and involvement that the trustees want to have in sort of the day-to-day activities of the portfolio. But again, we can have those conversations and get to something. But I do think that this is an appropriate meeting space with RMC to have, for example, a quarterly presentation of the performance of the portfolio. And presumably you would have a consultant or staff present the portfolio. We still can have the managers come in, as we spoke before, and talk about their mandate and portfolios on a given schedule. But beyond that, there should be a schedule where everyone kind of has an idea, at year end, at the quarter end, how is the portfolio doing? Are there any concerns? Are there any issues that should be brought up? Do we need to have someone go out and investigate? Why is our manager not performing well? Or is this a new asset class that we should consider putting into the portfolio? And this body not only has that oversight, but can then delegate and expect accountability back so that you can make a decision. Yes, let's go into this new opportunity set, or let's not invest in that opportunity. Those sorts of conversations need to be happening, but it's a question of where is it appropriate to have the conversation, and then how do you want that executed and then reported back? So those are actionable items that we're not getting into today, but that's out here now. We want to be able to talk about that and have this conversation going forward. Yes.
Vijay, you mentioned an investment committee. How would you define an investment committee? What are its functions and what competencies does it need to have?
Investment committees generally are the sort of the final sort of policy and oversight for any investments that are going on in the portfolio. Different investment committees, depending on the level of experience and expertise and the desire to be involved, will make decisions or delegate decision-making to either service providers or staff or others, or they'll keep it to themselves, but there's a process for doing that. It's really, again, I hate to repeat and saying there's no one answer, there's no one idea, but ultimately, the investment committee, which are generally, subordinate and report into a higher, like a full board, let's say, is sort of, but it's focused in on the investments of an organization and decision-making and oversight, and then they report into the larger body, which in some cases, like, with yourselves or with like ERS and others, the investment committee is the same people that are on the board. So just a different focus at those meetings than the general meeting. And I know you have other agenda items topics that you talk about at this meeting. So that's why it's not just an investment committee meeting, right? Although you play that role.
How frequently is it the case that investment committees are not the final board? Aren't there institutions that establish expert committees, one of which is the investment committee, consisting of people who are professionals with knowledge?
So a lot of
investments?
like corporate boards, what they'll do is, they have like an audit committee, they have an investment committee, they have maybe a human resources or, personnel type committees. So they do that, and they might have a subsector of the board that'll be involved, and maybe those people have particular expertise, right? Like they're an accountant or they're an auditor or something like that, that they bring to bear. And they are given some level of discretion and ability to make decisions. But even if they are making decisions, they always report into the higher board. Even if the subgroup is a member of that board, they'll have like a presentation. So there are different ways that you can organize it.
Well, I have two concerns when you mention that this RM committee could be the investment committee. So this is something hopefully we can address later on. One concern is that you already note that discussions take place at the RM committee and at the board level without finality. And that's an observation that could raise some concerns about how well in this venue we can actually do the work that an investment committee needs to do. The other concern that I have is that our meetings of the RM committee are public. And so the discussions are limited to those things which can be discussed in public. And so I just hope that we'll take a look at whether or not the RM committee should be regarded as the investment committee, and have a real clear idea as to what the role of the investment committee is, and where its functions can be best performed.
Those are very, very good points. Very important insights. I have somewhere in here in terms of the way, you OHA as an entity, there's the public component to it, but then there's also that you are maybe learning trade secrets and confidential information from, say, your managers. If they come and report and they want to tell you about their strategy, they might say, hey, there's certain things here that we don't want to be in the public record because it takes away our advantage in the marketplace. And if that's your investor, you don't want them to lose that advantage because they're presumably making those investments on your behalf. So in this document, I talk a little bit about some of those challenges. And the observation is the RMC actually is a de facto sort of investment committee. Whether it's appropriate going forward or you need to create something else, that could be in the solution space. But it is relevant and important to consider the idea of like, okay, what has to be done in public because you're a public entity, right, and then what can be done outside of the public arena because you have to protect information on behalf of your service providers. Otherwise, you lose their service, right? I don't want to make investments because OHA is going to make it all public, and then I'm going to lose my competitive advantage. And so the ERS, the EUTF, all the public plans, including the Nevada plan that came, they all have ways to deal with that. So it is appropriate. And it's probably something, though, that you have to consider with your legal counsel and the way, kind of entities in Hawaii deal with sunshine law and than the need to sometimes protect certain kinds of information. There may be certain decisions, there may be certain information that you can protect for so long, but not forever. And that happens all the time in this industry. You know, they investment managers who want to do business with public entities recognize that at some point their information may have to become public, because your duty is not to the manager, it's to the state and to the people. And so, you know, but if there's a clear understanding of when and how that happens and when things can be, that can all be dealt with suitably enough so that they're comfortable to work with you. But again, that's kind of beyond an investment consultant or a board consultant's ability to give you sound advice. You need legal counsel and people who understand the laws of the state clearly. Thank you. Okay, then if so we talked about the reporting. We talked about trustee. There I have a comment there that you have trustee aides that have a lot of kind of institutional knowledge in the organization. Somewhere here on another page, I'm sorry, I don't have it at my fingertip, but I do talk a little bit about the idea that, you know, the decision-making, trustees, you as elected officials, there's sometimes turnover. And so you have to consider that in the way decisions are made and how you do that. Even for the administrative staff, there seems to be turnover there at times. But you do need to manage this portfolio for the long term. So how best to do that? That's just an observation. I have it on some page and I don't have it. I don't know. I'm not able to refer to it directly right now. But I think if we go on to then page 7, and again, because I do want to move things along. Resourcing. So maybe it's this page, just sort of in terms of resourcing. Yeah. So, you know, all investors, not just OHA, right? You're resource constrained. There are never enough people. There are never enough opportunities. But how do you deal that as OHA is a public entity, but with a very unique mandate and an obligation? You have election cycles. You have civil servants. So those are things that you want to consider. When we look at the second bullet point there on the left, person, things, and intangibles, I just generally kind of categorize those as the resources at your disposal. So you have human resources, the persons, right? You have trustees, you have the aides, you have administrative staff, and then you have all the service providers. You know, I just make some observations here in terms of, you know, the challenges and the strengths of that. You know, you have, you know, elected officials who are ultimately responsible to your constituents, to the people, to the Hawaiian people, but you also have election cycles. And so there's the risk that, you know, people turn over more frequently than if they were, like, say, there's certain appointed board positions where people can be on boards for long time, 10 years or more. You also have a little bit of turnover for different reasons, maybe with administrative staff. Sometimes the aides also have civil service career paths, but they might not have as much experience in capital markets other than maybe institutional memory. So there are trade-offs here. So again, and then I talk a little bit again about the service providers and the need to kind of have a more holistic view of the portfolio. And then you have to understand your service providers all operate on a business model that they're trying to maximize that may or may not coincide with the objectives of OHA. So how do you hold your service providers accountable? And there are different ways to do that, whether you're holding RFPs or you're requiring reporting and what have you. Material resources, I think they're mostly adequate. The only thing I note here is, like, if you wanted to have a conference or your own version of bringing in the managers and talking about the portfolio over a day or two, I wasn't sure if, like, the facilities you have here or somewhere on island would be appropriate, but you might think about that in the future as a way to, again, articulate to managers and service providers who OHA is, who you are as a brand, what your interest is in terms of the market and achieving your larger goals and objectives that you have in your vision. And then I also define out sort of intangible resources. So networks, right, of I note that there are other indigenous groups. There are also other state agencies that are not pension plans or OPED plans that are similar to yourselves that generate their corpus and their wealth from the wealth of the state. That's a network there. And they do, I understand, meet fairly frequently. That could be a resource for you to hear and to understand how they tackle investment needs. Also, you know, how are you seen in the marketplace? What's your brand? Do you have mind space in your investors' brain? You know, so when they come across an idea, they think, oh, this would be perfect for OHA. And that's challenging. Even when I was at a large public pension plan, you know, we'd bring in managers that had been in the portfolio for years, and they'd say, well, how big do you think we are? And they would be off by billions and billions of dollars, which makes you think like, hey, you're not really thinking about us. You know, I don't expect you to live and breathe it the way someone on the staff might, because they have real, you know, kind of skin in the game. But I expect you to know something about who we are and what we're trying to do. So that's an intangible resource that you can build up. You know, and again, leveraging the fund managers that way. The other thing I throw in here, which is maybe a little bit, you know, on the side, or maybe it's a little, I don't know if it's controversial, but kind of like, are there Hawaiian investment ideas or values that you want to have expressed in the portfolio? So what does that mean? This is my observation, so I'm not looking for answers or feedback. I'm just saying, you know, are there certain kinds of investments that you as OHA, as Hawaiians, want to pay particular attention to? Or is there a Hawaiian way of investing that we can express in the portfolio? I don't know the answer to that, but I put that out there. And it's not so far-fetched in that there are religious organizations, right, that will say, we want portfolios that reflect our values, that show how we invest. And so it's not far-fetched to kind of say, well, is OHA as a unique entity in the world have a Hawaiian way of investing or a value? We have to think carefully about that, right? There are certain rules as fiduciaries about generating returns and focusing on that. You can't just be only about trying to express views and values, and that has to be checked. But still, like I said, there are groups there that will say, we don't invest in certain things because it doesn't reflect our values. So that's another aspect in terms of intangibles, an intangible resource and way to impress on the marketplace who you are as an organization. And that, I think, is important for every organization to do. Moving on to page 8. This is again kind of on the investment program in terms of, you know, you do have proper documentation. I talk a little bit about the manager of managers approach. There may be some limitation in terms of communication between the RMC and your staff. There are decisions that are maybe not always articulated either by staff or trustees. And, you know, that process needs to be made explicit and probably put into a document that you can refer to make sure, hey, are we adhering to what we said we wanted to do? And then, of course, there should be a process for changing that procedure or process if that becomes the case, either for some reason now or in the future, another group comes in and wants to do things slightly differently. But it should be driven by those sorts of discussions and then documentation. You know, and then the other thing is your investment program, you can have different kinds of service providers. So, you know, you don't have an investment consultant really at the moment. The board consultant is different than an investment consultant, the way we've defined it, although there's some overlap. I think that Mr. June, the CIO of Lacers, talked about working with specialty consultants, or maybe it was Kwan from EUTF. So they have consultants that focus just on private markets or just on, you know, real estate or something like that, investment real estate, not your direct investments. And then there's also the opportunity to work with an OCIO, which is kind of in some ways, you know, farming out the portfolio management day in, day out, but yet keeping the control in terms of the policy and the oversight and the big decisions. So those are things that we can talk some more about. On the right-hand side, you know, again, I kind of highlight in some of the bullet points, you know, in the investment policy statement, kind of the program structure, kind of was written at a different time, and I don't know if it's best practice or best practice for where you need to go, given how you're growing. It's kind of siloed. Did I misspell siloed? And not holistic. Looks kind of strange. To me. The role of the consultants, again, the need for an investment consultant or someone who's supporting staff and supporting the trustees day in, day out. You may need specialty reports, liquidity, or in the case of the private markets investments, there's something called a pacing study. How much should you invest every year in order to get to your targets, and sort of how you go about that, the kinds of strategies. That's something that we may come back with and give you at least an illustrative example of what a pacing study might do, assuming you want to do more in private markets. Yes, Trustee.
Okay, so you mentioned where we'd like to be at financially speaking. So who determines that? Do we as a board? Because I like to see us at $1 billion. That's where I see a portfolio at. We should have been that a long time ago. But now that we're moving forward and all of these observations you've made are like to the T, is exactly what we need in order to make the changes, in order for us to get to the place where we should have been or will be. So on that note, do you have, is there anyone that would be able to guide us in that direction as far as what are we shooting for? If we want to get to $1 billion, what does it take for us to get there? As an example.
Sure. I think a way to think about that is that, you have an overall kind of strategic plan, right, that you're implementing, and you want to support that. And the portfolio should support that strategic plan. I believe your CEO, Stacy, is very good about articulating that plan in public. I've seen her interviewed, and she is very strong and makes that very clear. That's a good thing. And the portfolio should support that effort, the ultimate goals. Now, it may not you might not go and talk about the portfolio every day about, okay, how does that improve, housing opportunities, but, it ultimately serves the purpose, and you define that purpose, right? You define this, the trustees, you define the strategic plan and goal, the portfolio, and how you get to whether that's, $1 billion or 10 billion, whatever. What you need to understand is not so much like, okay, well, we need to be $1 billion or we need to be 3 billion. But there is some idea of like, okay, over so much time based on investments and the returns, you will be $1 billion. You will be 3 billion. You should expect, you should have those sort of expectations. And are we on the path, and is it probable that we will reach our goals with the given portfolio that you have? Oh, now for whatever reason, capital market expectations have changed. So now we think we won't be able to reach that goal in 2 years or 3 years. So now should we change the way we invest, or do we keep holding what we're doing? Those are questions you can ask, and that's the support that you should be getting from your consultants and your staff to say we're on target or we're not on target. We need to make decisions to get there. And so that all comes into some of these kinds of reports that sort of project out, usually like in a pension plan, they use an actuary, right? So you can see like the negative cash flow for the public plans here in Hawaii is something that's projected out over time. So they're taking on more risk because they need to generate better returns. So that's a clear sort of reaction to the reality of where they are. And the boards there are provided that information by the actuaries, by the consultants. Now, you don't have actuaries because you don't have those kinds of obligations, but you have different obligations to your community. You have different ways that you want to get there and how you want the portfolio to support that. So that's a conversation that you should have, and that your service providers and your helpers should have with you. And then, that's it. Okay, we should do more in private equity, or we should do less in fixed income, or whatever the case might be. But you're on the right track, I think, in terms of that observation. And
I think we should all be looking for that goal, the end goal of getting us to the 7.
sure. And one thing
Oh,
you
sorry,
should
I keep forgetting that. Sorry.
one thing you should observe about your portfolio and where you are is that you're a little bit unique for a lot of institutional investors in the US, not all, but unique in the sense that you actually have a growing corpus based on the fact that you have positive cash flow. I mentioned just a second ago that there are other groups and plans like public plans that are under a lot of constraint because their people are retiring, and so the money is going out the door, as opposed to the new employees being able to kind of contribute to the plan the way they traditionally have. But that's not the case with OHA. So that puts you in a unique position to, it's
Good to
great
hear.
as a portfolio manager or a CIO, being in a position where you have you have money coming into your portfolio every year that you have to figure out, how am I going to invest this? That's a much better problem to have than, oh my God, we're paying out so much. And now what do I have to sell to cover expenses or, operations? So I think that's the case, that you have that. And so take advantage of that. That is a superpower, right? That's a
20%
strength
would
that,
be
that
really
you
nice
should,
for
you
the
should take
public
advantage of.
land trust. We'll get a lot more money.
Vijoy,
Yes, Tristan.
Lindsay.
I just want to encourage my colleague across the street from me that when I came in office 11 years ago, our corpus was 350 million, and today it's over 500 million. So we have progressed, so progressing by speed is not necessarily always the right thing to do, because if we earn fast money, we could be taking more risks. So I think we've been doing pretty good. And now that we have you, I think we're going to do better.
Well, I hope so. I thank you for that. I don't control outcomes, but I'm trying to produce, process and report. Yeah, I think, that's very helpful. I think it's important to remember that, if you don't mind me saying, ultimately you have goals and visions and programs that you're trying to impact your community with, and the portfolio again should support that. And as opposed to just focusing on like, how can we generate the highest returns or get to certain levels? That's important. That will happen, but it should happen kind of as a byproduct of your effort to reach your bigger mission, which is much more important than, how much money any investor or strategy makes. I know it's related, but I just want to emphasize that's kind of the approach or the attitude is really that, you want to continue to be significant to your community and provide the kinds of resources that they need, and the portfolio should support that, as opposed to let's generate return and then let's figure out what to do with it. Anyways, that's my view. You can disregard it completely because I'm not a trustee. I'm just a guy that you're hiring to do a little bit of work for.
Trustee Trask.
Thank you. I'm very interested in where we are at page number 8. I really couldn't agree more. The conclusion on the bottom of the first column, best practices of service providers is not being implemented, is not. And I think that the recommendation there, investment consultant, specialty, or OCIO is not being used. I think we need to, right at this time, talk about the fact that we need to have an investment consultant online, not in administration. We don't have some of the expertise. And if you take a look at what the state requires for trustees to run, you'll see that there's no criteria at all required that any trustee have financial, investment, or other capacity. The same is true for the positions on admin. So when I look at this, it's telling me that we need an investment consultant to assist us in the future. I'm so glad we have you folks online now to give us this advisory. When I look though at the second paragraph, Northern Trust is fulfilling role of custodian. Common Fund is in the role on the private market and distributions. Are you telling me here, Vijoy, that they're doing good? Or are you just informing me of what I have online? Because when I looked at this page, I was thinking, my God, we're a state agency with a fiduciary obligation handling native and public trust money. I haven't had a single person that came in, and I very much benefited from the training, but not a single one of them, Vijoy, had the kind of trust obligation I have. When I look at your advisory page 8, we need an investment consultant. Investment consultant is my So when we go forward with this, with the implementation the next several months, don't let this fall through the crack. And let's put a star, because we're not following best practices of service providers are not, and we have a fiduciary obligation to do it or we're liable. Same thing with the role of the consultants, yeah. The role of service of investment consultants with different expertise, not utilized, not utilized. So these are the things I would have corrected by the board. And that is the reason why we have a RM committee. And that is to look at what our resources are for management. I am very opposed to trying to bifurcate the committees. RM is a committee of the whole, and it should be. There's no excuse for staff not knowing investment or trustees. That's what we're trying to correct now. But RM committee is correctly comprised. And I would oppose any effort being suggested that somehow we bifurcate the assets of our people and put the portfolio into another asset class. No way, trustees. We have a fiduciary obligation, one, with regards to our oversight of our people's assets. And we need to do it in one unified way. We're not gonna make a small committee and pull out the portfolio and give it to a subcommittee. No, it's resource management. It stays here, and that's why we have the training. Let's proceed.
Okay, thank you. And if we move on to page.
Vijoy, Stacy,
Oh, sorry.
or
Aloha, kalamai for not having my camera on. I'm working from home today. I'm actually sick, but I wanted to make sure that I didn't miss this important meeting. Vijoy, I just want to make sure that we're clear in what that recommendation was. My understanding is that we do have expertise currently with our endowment director, and that there were previous decisions made by this board or previous board actions that did not allow for external consultation, investment consultation. So I wanted COO Casey Brown to speak to that, because again, I don't want to leave this meeting with the impression that we don't have the expertise on with our administration, or with the request that was put before the board that external consultation was requested by administration. Mahalo.
Oh, okay. KP, you want me to say a little more?
Yes, please.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I think what KP is referring to was there was an intention to bring on board an independent consultant, investment consultant, which would work in coordination with our internal expertise. So someone like Ryan, and that effort was sort of aimed at that type of a consultant, but at the time, I believe the board did decide that they wanted a different kind of consultant, someone that gave them what Vijoy is giving them now, was to first look at things from the broader perspective. But what KP is noting, and CFO and Ryan, who were around, was that there was an effort to procure an investment consultant at the time, which was then sort of redirected to a different type of consultant. Mahalo.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think those observations are relevant and important to keep in
Oh,
mind.
I'm sorry, Vijoy. We do have a question. I'm going to recognize Ramona, our CFO.
Aloha, trustees.
Aloha.
For the record, I'd like to comment that Ryan Lee was the so-called investment endowment director, and then his appointment was suspended. And so this was about 1.5 years ago. And so it's only been this past January that he has been reinstated as the investment director. So for about a year and a half, we're just on maintenance mode because we're under the impression that the investment consultant, Consequent, was going to be the so-called investment consultant for the board.
Hmm.
Okay,
Thank you. I have a question. Oh, I'm sorry. I'd like to recognize trustee Trask.
You know, I don't understand, I mean, the conversations that we're having. At one point, I was told that we had, the investment consultant was hired by the office. Later, I found out we didn't have an investment consultant. We had an endowment advisor. We don't have an endowment, folks. We have stocks, bonds, cash money, and what we need is an investment consultant. An investment consultant is not the same thing as an endowment manager. That is why we need to have and look to how we can define, VJoy, the correct definition for investment consultant, their duties, their obligations to report quarterly to the board. To the board. This is not something that is adjusting the admin. I am liable for what happens with the portfolio. Not Casey, not Mona. And I would like to have an investment consultant that is independent to come in on a quarterly basis, advise me and present a report. Yeah, I don't want this to fall through the cracks, VJoy. That's why y'all are here. But if we're gonna bring online an investment consultant, I need somebody with the professional expertise so that I can post for that job because I don't have one online. And I don't think it's fair to dump a lot of work on the staff we have. That's not their job either. Thank you.
Okay, I'm just going to continue on page 9, which is just some observations related to the portfolio design. And we already discussed a little bit about the idea that some of the documentation, which is the necessary documents that you have, are not were created previously. And so some of the accountability and the asset classes were kind of created in a previous regime and probably need to be evaluated. I think they're still on some of the charts and advisory committee, which no longer functions, and that can easily be sort of moved aside. We talked a little bit about the manager approach, and again, that you know, the design of those mandates aren't truly coordinated and accountable the way things are executed at the moment. So we would you know, look to understand that more and come back with recommendations or advice there. So on the right side, again, we're talking about review of the portfolio, how it's designed, potentially, you know, considering alternative structure to the manager of managers. But again, maybe there are folks that like the manager of managers approach, so we can talk about that. Discretion and decision making is happening in the portfolio, and so is it at the right level, and is it with the right accountability, is sort of where we want to make more explicit. The last bullet point on this page that I would note is that also risk assessment and management is not necessarily, does not seem to be a primary design of the portfolio the way it's structured or reported now. And that's something that I think has to be more prominently. It's not that there isn't any risk management or concern. It's just in a way that doesn't make it as kind of one of the primary drivers of the design. And I think that's something that portfolios should have. So now if the next several pages, starting on page 10, and maybe we don't spend as much time kind of going through each of these, they are a little more self-explanatory. These are the different asset classes as they are in your current investment portfolio reports. What I would suggest is over on the left side, here is all of the asset classes that are defined are sort of structured where it sort of describes what is that as an asset class, what is the target portfolio as it's in your current reports, and then what are the subclasses and what is the purpose of having that investment in the portfolio. So that's little section that we've kind of written here on the left side of all these asset class pages is something that I encourage the trustees to take a look at, if you agree that it's accurate or not. But those are the sort of talking points that you should have to understand the portfolio and to be able to explain it. You know, when I was taking chemistry in high school, Ben Lagasa said, you know, you have to know what a mole is. You have to be able to wake up in the middle of the night and someone asks you, what is a mole? And you answer, oh, it's, you know, whatever, 6 times 10 to the 23rd. And for whatever reason, I might not remember anything else about chemistry class, but I still remember what a mole is. It's as overseers of the portfolio, you should have some understanding at some level, and you can expand on this and get deeper to be able to say, why do you own public equities? What are public equities? And so what I try to put here is maybe a little cheat sheet. Maybe you have your aides put it all into a single document. And so if you're ever asked, or if you're in conversation, you can say, yes, I understand we have, you know, public equities or securities that trade on exchanges. It's supposed to be 42% of the portfolio. It includes global investments, domestic investments, international emerging. And then what do equities do for you? Well, they're risk bearing. So you're taking risk. You're not necessarily, you know, not wanting risk in the portfolio. You need to take some risk in order to generate returns. Equities play that role. And over the long term, they oftentimes, and possibly in the case of the OHA portfolio, are drivers of your overall growth. And that's why you own equities. So I think at the very least, every trustee, depending on their level and experience, should be able to articulate something like that. And so I've done that for each of the asset classes. And again, I encourage you to go back, and if there's something you disagree with, or we should rewrite it, that's fine. This is just sort of a thumbnail sketch that hopefully can help you to be able to articulate and describe why your portfolio is designed the way it is. And maybe over time, you know, we'll talk about how that changes. At the bottom of the page, we also talk a little bit about the current sort of the primary managers that are overseeing that asset class for you. So in public equities, it's primarily JP Morgan. And then I have some observations about the asset class. So I kind of observe, you know, maybe there are numerous public equity managers. Are there too many? Are they overlapping in terms of their investments, securities? They may have slightly different strategies, but if everybody owns Apple, we need to have some true accounting and risk understanding of like, hey, you've got a lot of Apple in your portfolio, and even if different strategies are implementing it, at the end of the day, gosh, you own a lot of Apple, and if the next iPhone doesn't work out, that's going to be very negative. And that may be a risk you're willing to take. You may want to hold that much Apple in the portfolio, but maybe you could hold that with a single manager as opposed to many managers. So that's kind of an observation there. So there's perhaps a little higher complexity than maybe you need to have in this part of the portfolio. And if that's the case, does that mean you want to invest in passive, or you want to invest in more systematic strategies? We're getting a little bit into solution space here, and also into details that maybe as trustees, you don't have to know every move and aspect of a strategy, but you need to have some accountability back to you to understand, why do I own this particular manager? Why is this passive manager in the portfolio versus this active manager? And that should be explained to you. And that's why the left side of the page there gets a little bit in that direction. So again, as a tool, I think that you as trustees should, you know, be able to go through each of these asset classes, and at least that section be able to understand, okay, you know, the next page, page 11, you know, fixed income. So as an asset class, what is fixed income? So it primarily trades on primary or secondary markets. You may or may not know that this primary market in treasuries or in fixed income is probably an auction related market, or something that's underwritten by, you know, like in a municipal security, be underwritten by some investment banks and sold to on a syndicate to particular investors. Doesn't trade on an exchange necessarily the way stocks do. That's an important distinction in terms of stocks versus bonds. But then we have, again, What's the OHA target for fixed income? It's 18%. So that, that's something you should know. And that's a conversation piece too. Is that appropriate? And that's where you're getting advice, whether it's from your staff or from your consultants in terms of what's the appropriate allocation. And that's a fair question for you to ask. So there are the subclasses. And then also, why do you have fixed income in the portfolio? Generally, it's thought as a diversifying asset, right? If equities are driving your returns and growth over the long term, people kind of hold fixed income to diversify some of that risk so it's not as volatile. Although a couple of years ago, 2022, we saw that both stocks and bonds sold off at the same time in double digits. Very unusual, but it happens. So it's not that fixed income has less risk, or maybe it does have less risk, but that it doesn't have risk. It has different kinds of risk. And sort of why do you want to hold what you're holding in the portfolio? So, and again, some more observations in terms of the managers there, the different kinds of segments. The bond portfolio is actually pretty well diversified. But again, it's you want to have an overall view. On the next page, the private markets on page 12, again, we go into the same thing. What's the allocation? What are private markets? The way it's been reclassified, you had a lot more sort of private equity, and for some reason, it seems like you have less and you have more infrastructure investments and managers now. But that's all kind of different types of private equity managers. And so we saw Pantheon came in, Common Fund. I think actually, I don't know if it has on your screen, it should Goldman Sachs is sort of in that category as well. And then again, some observations on the right side in terms of the strategies, in terms of real assets. Opportunistic credit is something I think that is a fairly small and maybe has come into the portfolio through kind of a legacy. We do note that some of the reports, particularly in the private markets, by your NTRS, Northern Trust, it could be, I would say, enhanced or improved in terms of transparency or the kinds of information they're reporting. And again, that would be relevant to you to get sort of advice on whether the program is functioning the way you might hope it to. And that's also the case in the hedge funds, which is the next page. So page 13. I'll note that hedge funds as an asset class isn't always so straightforward. Not every investor actually considers it as a separate asset class because a lot of the underlying investments are in equities and fixed income and commodities. And therefore, just calling it a hedge fund doesn't necessarily mean that you are diversifying. Sometimes it's called diversifying strategies. You may actually be ending up doubling up again. And there's nothing wrong necessarily with having a hedge fund, but the only way to kind of differentiate hedge funds usually is that they have a higher fee structure than other strategies. I mean, if they truly do things like shorting, which is a type of betting on the stock will go down over time or the asset will go down. If they can do that well, that might be a skill worth paying for. But you have it as a separate asset class, which is, again, it's fine. It's the way you've defined it, but not every investor does that. In fact, kind of different ways that they might define so-called hedge fund strategies are sort of absolute return or diversifying strategies. And absolute return doesn't mean that they never lose money, but they are risk focused, which we talked a little bit about, which means that they want to lose less than when the markets lose a lot. So they want to they don't want to follow markets. So we talk about that up capture, down capture. On the down capture, they capture less of the market, which is a very good thing when you're trying to build a portfolio over a long time period. But you do deal with transparency issues here. And I think the reporting in the Northern Trust report isn't that clear what these strategies do. At some point, maybe when they were hired, someone came in and talked about what this hedge fund does and why it's important. And that's fine. But there needs to be that ongoing accountability and transparency over time. And just looking at the report, it's hard for me to be on the outside and sort of say, what are they doing? Unless maybe I look at their benchmark and I have to assume their benchmark is correct. And then maybe I have some idea of the kinds of risks that they're taking. But for me, it's not so easy.
Really quick, I'm sorry, I asked a question regarding the benchmarks. You've observed that, correct?
The benchmarks, yes.
The benchmarks, yeah. We haven't met them.
Do we have that?
Have we met them?
The benchmarks are just sort of you put it together. It's not a manager necessarily. It's different types of strategies. They could be indexes, and your consultant or your staff will kind of like say, hey, this is an appropriate way to measure. So a lot of relative return strategies, which most people, they say, we don't know how we're doing unless we can measure it. So people put benchmarks. The thing with hedge funds is they kind of say, hey, we're absolute return. There is no benchmark. We still put benchmarks there in order to have some idea, because that's the only way we can kind of understand what they're doing. But that is a distinction between sort of absolute return or hedge fund type strategies versus traditional benchmarks. And there are all kinds of implications for the way risk is managed in those different types of broad strategies, relative returns versus absolute returns. But the benchmark is something that is designated in advance. There's certain criteria for what is an appropriate benchmark to measure yourself against in terms of it being investable and transparent and low cost. And these are defined by like the CFA Institute and other industry groups that will say this is an appropriate benchmark. Now, whether a consultant uses that as the benchmark or not is where there's sometimes discretion. So they may meet the criteria, or they may design a benchmark just for you, and they might put something in there that doesn't meet that criteria. But if they want to be sort of CFA compliant, then they try to meet that. So the joke in the industry is, what do you call the old benchmark? And that's the benchmark that you couldn't outperform. So that's a bad joke, but that's something. We're not comedians, we're investors. Let me just finish up here. The last page is really the enhanced liquidity and cash. This is where you've got a State Street, mostly it's in a State Street strategy, which is kind of cash equivalent. And I think you have a bank, and it's more for operations and activities. The main thing when it comes to liquidity, so there are different ways. So you as a long-term investor, asset owner, cash, we think of as what we call a cash drag. So the more cash you hold, the less you invest in the market, and over time that's seen as negative for your returns. If you were a hedge fund or an individual, sometimes they see cash as an asset class, or I go into cash when I don't know what's going on in the market and I don't mind sitting out the market. But as a fiduciary, as an institutional investor, you should try to be fully invested at all times. Now, maybe you're say, hey, I'm worried that the stock market's going to go down. But instead of going to cash, maybe you reallocate or rebalance to another strategy. And again, that needs to, best practice would be to have that defined in advance, saying, hey, for some reason, the stock market is above its some average or some historical levels, or, the different ways that we measure value is too rich, too high. And therefore we should rebalance to something else, or we should have other strategies in there that achieve returns and growth in a different way, so we're more diversified. But the main point when it comes to holding cash is, unless you need that cash as an institution, like for your spending policy or for some other need as an institution, you should try to keep that under 2% at any given time. You should really try to be what we call fully invested. So that concludes my observations, and I hope they weren't meant to be necessarily as controversial or as fired up as maybe some points might be. But these are good conversations to have. And again, remember, we're in sort of our problem space right now. We need to have these conversations for you to manage this portfolio as a group going forward. And when we come back with solutions, hopefully we've had these conversations, or not solutions, or we're going to make recommendations, and we're going to probably have options for you to make choices. But you need to vet that, and it needs to be something that as a group you can live with. And then you start to implement, you start to build a portfolio that you deserve, that OHA needs to be successful into the future. And so that's kind of where we are. And I'm looking forward to having conversations offline. I'm looking forward to being back in front of you in this session in the future to be able to find something that is actually not an observation, but actionable, that is actually going to be in your policy and that you can use to govern and oversee the assets of OHA now and into the future. So happy to take questions, but thank you very much for your time.
Trustee Aquino.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Vijoy, I just want to say thank you very much. This has been extremely helpful. The observations you've presented to us are comprehensive. Some of them resonate very well. They're intuitive. Other ones catch our blind spots, which they're intended to do. But I also like the fact that you're very measured about this. You don't jump from observation to action. You're telling us we're going to have to analyze this deeper, because some of the observations are things that we're doing that once worked, but will not work in the future, such as the manager of managers. But I really appreciate the fact that we're going to take a deeper look at anything that we've observed and vet it. So thank you very much. I'd also like to say one other thing, Chair. I appreciate our CEO and CFO and their comments they made earlier. The information given to us by the administration is absolutely essential for us to know our condition and our process. So I want to thank them and continue to invite their input. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Vijay.
Thank you again, Vijoy. Members, we have an action item today. So it is RM 2405. And I will turn this over to our Ponui, Casey, to present this action item to us. Casey.
Yeah, mahalo Chair Waihe'e and trustees. So this action item relates to the Maui disaster aid deployment. Your folks approved the 5 million and the proposal, which was deploying those funds directly to those impacted on Maui. The presentation of the framework and structure of the deployment of those funds was presented to you folks in a presentation to the RM committee. So what we're here to get an action done for is administration needs you folks to delegate the authority to disperse the funds to individuals. So being that this is the first time OHA is going to disperse funds to individuals, we need that authority delegated to the administration. I would turn you guys' attention specifically to page 73 in the entire meeting folder for RM and Roman numeral 3 on the action item. That's where we explain what the delegation of authority technically is and why we're asking for it. So while OHA is currently set up by framework, by process, and by current delegation, we're currently set up to grant, administration can grant monies to large organizations, 501c3s. And when we evaluate the applicants, we bring them to the board to approve those final dollars, those grant dollars. That's the process in place. But we are also allowed, OHA is also allowed to give this money to individuals, which is what you folks are wanting to do now. But we're not set up to do that. So we are coming back here to ask for the delegation so that the administration can award individuals. I'm going to stop there.
Casey.
Yep.
I have a question. Why does it require 2 motions if the second motion approves the delegation authority? I mean, it also, like, the second motion approves the delegation authority and the not to exceed amount.
Right.
So why do we need a separate motion to just approve the delegation authority?
So we took this based on mana'o from our corp counsel, and so we definitely need one delegation, one motion which delegates the authority. The suggestion to have the second motion was to specifically point out that there is a framework in place, and there's dollar amounts that we want to use that you folks already looked at and saw, and that those amounts are 4,000 and 9,000, so we don't want to exceed 9,000.
No, I kind of understand it. The first one delegates the authority, and the second one approves that delegated authority to do that.
Yeah.
So I get it. All right. You know what? I'm gonna let's move the first motion and then we can discuss it. So can I get a motion to approve the delegation of authority to OHA CEO to determine whether a Maui wildfire disaster aid deployment grant application is able to provide the activities proposed in their application for the grant in accordance with HRS Chapter 1017C1D. The CEO may further delegate its authority to the designee from administration. It's been moved by Trustee Alafa. Is there a second?
Seconded.
Seconded by Trustee Aquino. Okay, is there any discussion on this motion? Trustee Aquino.
Just a quick question, a clarification beyond the action item description. What does to provide the activities proposed refer to?
So that I think that's language taken straight from the rules or the, what is that, Everett? I know that language is coming straight out of chapter 10, I believe. And essentially, because we're relying on that language, it's my understanding that that language is going to be used for administration to determine whether each applicant is indeed meeting its eligibility requirements in this case. Each applicant is able to, you know, basically what that language says. But yeah, I'll stop here. Everett had his hand up. Everett, you can add to it if you feel I missed something.
Chair Waihe'e, good afternoon, trustees. So just to maybe specify a little bit more, our grant statute provided under HRS 10-17 provides that there are certain types of eligible recipients of OHA grants, and that includes applicants who are an individual who in the board's determination is able to provide the services or activities proposed in the application for a grant. So in this case, because these are individuals who would be receiving OHA grant funds, we just want to be clear that that determination, as provided by statute, has been properly delegated from the board to administration in the administration of this grant.
So motion one is conferring upon our CEO the purview of determining whether an applicant qualifies and can fulfill what is required.
Correct. And that's, again, because that's specific, that language is very specific to individuals, whereas the board normally, you know, well, one, approves grants at the board level, and then two, doesn't usually deal with individuals. So we just want to make sure that, again, that
Thank you very much.
delegation is clear.
Trustee Trask.
Thanks about this. The quote you're giving me and the law does give us some authority, but it's for services, isn't it? Everett, what you just read? HRS 1017? Give me the law.
Yes. So to Chair Waihe'e, to Trustee Trask's point, the statute states that who in the board's determination is able to provide the services or activities proposed in the application for a grant. So it's
Right.
services or activities, and we're interpreting that activities is the types of things that those grant funds will be spent on by the persons or ohana affected by the West Maui fires.
And your legal opinion is that we can give away 5 million in trust dollars to people who are saying generally under HRS 10 that they're using it for services?
Or the certain
Is
activities
there any
provided
Right,
for
what are
in
the activities?
May I add
Go ahead.
something?
Sorry, Casey, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Waihe'e. Trustee Trask, we have an eligibility requirements and we have criteria that this program is framed around, and so that was presented to the board. That's sort of the framework we're gonna follow. So it's not gonna be like terminology wise, it's not necessarily services, but it's
That's
gonna be
correct.
more, it's gonna be more activities that.
No, I want that to be noted on the record.
Okay.
Because you're citing HRS and you're using the term activities, and I'm telling you it is incorrectly applied here. I want it on the record. The second thing is that we did approve the 5 million. It was sent back to admin to come up with a process so that we could award the grants. But I still don't see what the process is. Is there any kind of priority? For instance, we know that many of those who lost homes were insured. We know some were not. We know some were underinsured. We know that some people died and their family didn't have funeral coverage. So where's the purpose of the grant? Where's the priority? You know, the administration is going to implement a new process. I agreed to it. Can I see what the process is? And we're going to give grants to individuals. I know that we can slide by, but for what purposes?
Yeah, Trustee Trask, we're happy to provide you with the presentation that was given on February 7th. There's a couple of slides in this action item.
I saw it, Casey, I saw it.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is that you're coming back with grants, and I'm looking for the grant criteria. And I'm noticing also that our grant department is very, very limited. I have people in my office in Hilo burdened with trying to carry the grants we got. So while we're giving this to admin to give to grants, are we gonna beef up our staff there? Who in grants is doing this work? And I feel like when I look at this, the CEO may further delegate the authority to a designee from administration. I would like to have something here so that I will know what the grant process is and who do we have to do it. Because the few grant people you have in my office in Hilo are up to their neck in work. Who's going to do this? And what is the criteria that we're going to give away the 5 million? How are we ensuring that these folks are even Hawaiians?
Yep, Trustee, we're happy to present to you or the full board an overview of the presentation. Does cover some of those points you're pointing out in what was presented. We're happy to go through even more of it.
Casey, wait. Stacy wants to say something.
Can I say one more thing, please? Oh,
okay.
Yeah, and the people that the grants team is not going to carry this alone. Actually, the primary people who are going to be helping to deliver this is our beneficiary service agents. So it's going to be our community engagement division folks.
Okay, Stacy.
Mahalo, Chair. Thank you, Trustee Trask. I always appreciate the diligence in which you approach these big decisions. I do wanna echo what Casey just said. It is going to be our beneficiary services, specifically Roy Newton in Maui, in our Maui office, who will be helping to lead this effort. We will be providing him extra supports. We will be bringing on temporary hires from Maui so that we have people from community helping to take in applications and be able to disperse the funding. I do want to let you know that there is a very detailed process. Of course, when we come in front of trustees, we have very limited time. So we try to summarize as best we can a very detailed process that does have criteria. I will make sure that Casey gets you the detailed description of the criteria and the process that we will follow in intake of applications, in award, in determining funding awards and distribution of funding.
You know, I've kept up with it, Stacy. I am tracking you folks, so I know what is happening. Now, Nini Au, as I understand it, has the oversight of this with grants and beneficiary services. I am aware of that. What I'm asking you is that when you take a look at it with all the authority going to you, I'd like to know what the priority is for disbursements. And I would like to know who is implementing this? Not admin, who? Who?
Yes, so it will be Niniel Kavaihai as our community engagement director. It will be under her oversight. And then in terms of prioritization, we did keep it general. In terms of $9,000 for those who are homeowners and 4,000 for renters. You know, there's a lot of complexity, trustee, when we get to determining different types of costs and expenditures that these victims are having to pay for. And so, you know, we didn't want to make those determinations. We want to be able to give them lump sums and give them the freedom to determine what are their highest priorities in terms of paying off either debts or expenses that were unforeseeable.
Stacy, Casey.
Mahalo, Chair Waihee, and to add a little more for Trustee Trask's, for example, for Native Hawaiian verification, we will absolutely be doing that, Trustee Trask, and we'll be using all the known and accepted forms such as DHHL, KSS Ho'olu Data Center. You know, we have our own ancestry verification process. We are slapping on eligibility requirements. So while there's going to be, normally with our grants, we usually have evaluated scores. In this case, we're gonna set in place eligibility requirements, and those requirements will be followed very stringently, including Hawaiian verification.
Why is this not coming back to the board? We're talking about $5 million here. I don't mind deferring to the staff to put together a grant program and other things. But this paragraph, motion 1 and motion 2, you know, you're asking me to approve it, a standard. I don't even know what the 9,000 is based on. The statute that you're citing, HRS 1017, in my estimation, does not apply. You know what I'm saying? And in terms of the grant, I mean, I just would like to know who's doing it in the overburden and understaffed grant, you know, section that we have now. I would prefer it to say motion 1, CEO may further delegate the authority to designate from administration. But where does this ever return to the board? We just take the 5 million, pass it to admin. We don't ask for anything on the record with regards to priorities for grant awards, verification of blood quantum. I'm not here to take your word for it, Casey. We're a state agency, and I have yet to see what your and Stacy's criteria are. Starting with 1, you will ensure that recipients are Native Hawaiians with a capital or small n. You know, I mean, we're liable for it. And I would like to see some detail. If not, you want to move this now, I can vote for it now, but you put at the end of your paragraph, this authority to the designation, to a designate from administration, but it has to be subject to the approval of the board. I mean, at least that, put some flesh on the bones. Instead of saying we turn it over to some unnamed people, admin can give it to any other designee. We don't even know their name. We don't even get to see what the criteria of the grants are for our people. Come on. I'm a trustee.
Trustee Trask, we're happy to start with the presentation, which has a lot of information, and we'll give you more. We're
I
happy to
don't
give you
need
more.
you to start with anything, Casey. It should have been sent to me before this thing came on the board. Send me the data. Send me the data. You know, I don't mind working with Stacy. I don't mind giving this to admin. But for goodness sakes, 5 million, we're delegating authority to anybody in the admin. We didn't even look at the grant criteria. You know, we did have further meetings, but the board did not approve total authority to unidentified staff of 5 million. Come on.
Okay, is there any further discussion? Okay, if there's no other discussion, can I get a roll call vote?
Trustee Ahuna is excused. Trustee Akaka.
Aye.
Mahalo. Trustee Akina.
Aye.
Trustee Alapa stepped out. Trustee Galataria is excused. Trustee Lindsay.
Aye.
Trustee Souza.
Aye.
Trustee Trask.
No.
Chair Waihee.
Yes.
5 yes, 1 no.
Okay, there's a second motion. Okay, can I get a motion to approve the delegation of authority to OHA's CEO to award Maui wildfire disaster aid deployment grants with tiered funding disbursements not to exceed $9,000 per grant? The CEO may further delegate this authority to a designee from administration. Can I get, it's been moved by Trustee Souza, seconded by Trustee Lindsay. Is there any discussion on this motion? Trustee Aquino.
Just a question for clarification. Will the deployment of the disaster aid be performed by an OHA grantee? And if so, what will we be paying this grantee for that service?
Chair Waihee.
Casey.
No, this is the whole point of this, is for OHA to do this work itself. So we're not going to give it to another grantee to then deploy and pay an admin fee. We're setting up our own infrastructure in-house with the help of our beneficiary services and our grants to deliver this ourselves. Trustee Aquino.
Casey, thank you for confirming that.
Casey, I don't, I guess my question is, why is it only $9,000 as the limit?
That's what was proposed for us to go with. So the team who's pulling together to deliver the disbursements here in OHA, one thing we can do is when we open this window and we start to look at applicants and engage them, is we're going to hear more about their situations. We're going to learn more about different needs that might be beyond just a homeowner and a renter, right? Or 9,000 and 4,000. So that's something that we plan to collect the info, bring it back to the board, and then, you know, have you guys decide if there's more you want to do. But this was given to us, to administration, to propose, and so this is what we're working with.
Okay, I mean, if it was 10, it'd be easier to count it. But anyway, if there's no other discussion, can I get a roll call
Chair
vote?
Waihee.
Oh, Trustee Akaka, sorry.
Hello, I have a question. Casey or Kapohana, is it possible for you folks to give us a monthly update?
Absolutely.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think that will give us trustees more peace of mind on the process and be able to give input and feedback on what we're hearing from our people, our beneficiaries, on what's working and what's not working.
Sure.
Ramona.
We can also send you a report every week of the checks that we cut.
Thank you.
Okay, so you know
Greatly
how much
appreciated.
to whom.
Is there any other information that would be important for us to know before we vote on this?
Chair Kaka, I would just say to continue to keep an open mind on the new intelligence that we learned from the Maui community. Like I mentioned, I'm glad I got a chance to mention the fact that this is a start, and we may learn more needs as they come. So you guys may choose to deploy more money in a different way, you know. So just that would be all I have to add.
Ramona.
I'd just like to add also that this is the exact same grant process that we always follow. The only difference is that OHA is the grantor and the grantee. And it's self-administered, and the checks are coming from OHA. But the rest of the grant process is exactly the same as, you know, as if we have given it to a grantee to administer.
Thank you. And how are we letting our beneficiaries know about this option for them to have?
The same way we promote our normal grants, Trustee, we have the plans in place, ready to launch. Once we have the delegated authority and once we stand this up.
Mahalo, I look forward to the updates.
Trustee Lindsay.
Thank you. I just want to share a little bit more how we arrived at that 9,000 and 4,000. We estimated the numbers of homes that were lost by our Hawaiians, and it's an estimate. And there were renters that were renting homes that lost all their goods. That was an estimate. So we added the two and we divided the $5 million. That's how we came up with 9,000 per home lost and 4,000 for goods lost. And you know, maybe as our administration work to disperse these monies, our people may not come forth to get the monies. We don't really know. So the question that Trustee Akaka asks about how we're going to let our people know, we're going to be extensive in letting them know. We may do radio, we may do television, just to let them know that this is available for them. We have Kawai Ola, and we anticipate that this may take up to, and maybe more, 6 months of disbursement. Some of our people have moved away, and if they hear about it, they may contact our office and come back to apply. So all that kind of consideration is going to be given to the people that suffered in these wildfires. Thank you.
Okay, if there's no further discussion, can I get a roll call vote?
Trustee Ahuna is excused. Trustee Akaka.
Aye.
Trustee Akina.
Aye.
Trustee Alapa stepped out. Trustee Galataria is excused. Trustee Lindsay.
Aye.
Trustee Souza.
Aye.
Trustee Trask.
No.
Chair Waihee.
Yes.
5 yes, 1 no, 3 excused.
Members, if there are no announcements, can I get a motion to adjourn? It's been moved by Trustee
Second.
Souza, seconded by Trustee Lindsay. Any discussion, members? Hearing none, can I get a roll call vote?
Trustee Akaka.
Aye.
Trustee Akina.
Aye.
Trustee Alapa is, stepped out. Trustee Lindsay. Trustee Souza. Trustee Trask.
Aye.
Chair Waihee. 6 yes.